Have you ever written a proverb? I mean, have you ever written a one-sentence statement that just had a lot of meaning or a lot of knowledge behind it? You know, when we think about proverbs or proverbs that affect us in our life, we usually think of the book of Proverbs. Because we think of passages like 1 Kings chapter 4, verses 32, that said that Solomon spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. He wrote a lot of proverbs. He was a man who had a lot of wisdom. When you think about proverbs, a group of elementary children one day were asked to write a one-sentence proverb. Here are 4 that were turned in. Patrick, who was 10, said, "Never trust a dog to watch your food." That was his proverb for life. Randy, who was 10, said, "Stay away from prunes." He thought that was helpful during the time in which he lived. Lauren, who was 9, said, "Felt markers are not as good as lipstick." And Ellen, who was 8, says, "Never try to baptize a cat." Now, all of those are good bits of information because I can tell you, you don't want to trust a dog with your food. I'm with Randy, and I try to stay away from prunes. And I've never tried to use lipstick, but felt markers surely can't be good. And cats, well, they don't like water. You know, proverbs are knowledgeable statements. They're things in which tell us good things in which we can latch on to. And some of the favorite proverbs come in Proverbs chapter 31. You know, today is the day that our nation has set aside to talk about mothers, and well, I thought it was apt for us to spend a little time talking about mothers. And we'll spend some time in our thoughts talking about how mothers are like roses. And we're going to get all of our information out of Proverbs chapter 31. So go ahead and turn there. And we're going to see all of these short little sentences, short little statements that mean a lot. And we're going to come across with a concept of mothers and why Mother's Day means so much. The way we're going to do so is we're going to look at 4 different points. We're going to look at how mothers are always blooming, they're forever caring, they're always giving, and they're forever sharing. But to do that, I want us to look at 2 passages in which were read for us just a moment ago. Look at Proverbs chapter 31, verse 10. This helps set the mindset of what's being written here in this particular proverb, and it's one that's popular. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. You know, that's usually thought to be the main passage of Proverbs chapter 31. But you know, I like to leave it as a different main passage. I like to use Proverbs 31:28 as the main passage of Proverbs chapter 31. Read it with me. Her children arise up and call her blessed, and her husband also, and he praiseth her. Mothers are always, have always, and will always be important. And I want us to look at this in 4 different ways this morning. Let's see how mothers are always blooming. And you can go to Proverbs 31, and we're going to center our minds upon verses 13 through 16 to get our 3 things in which we see. When we look at verse 13, we think about what blooming means. And in this context, blooming means seeking. Look at Proverbs 31, verse 13. She seeketh wool and flax, and work willingly with her hands. The virtuous woman that's being found here in Proverbs chapter 31 is a mother. And she's one who seeks after that which her family needs. You know, in the days in which Proverbs 31 was written, the mother would be responsible. The wife would be responsible for going about through the land, finding materials in which can be turned into clothing type materials. And then as this verse describes, verse 13, she would have to work with her hands to make those materials available. She did not buy ready woven clothes to stress the family, but she procured the raw materials. She's cheerful and she's diligent in her task. And I love something about mothers that we find here in Proverbs 31. They're always seeking. You can probably think back to your mother, and this is one of the ups and the downs of Mother's Day. Because sometimes our mothers are here, and sometimes we have to remember that our mothers are no longer here. So I understand that Mother's Day and Mother's Day sermons can be emotional. But think back to your mother just for a moment. She was always seeking, wasn't she? I can go ahead and tell you what my mother would do, and I didn't value this till much later in life. I knew it happened, but I didn't value it. My mother would go without what she needed clothing-wise so I could have it. I didn't value that then, but I value that now, and I know she knows that. But mothers are always seeking, verse 13. Look at verse 14. They're always preparing. We find this. She's like the merchant ships. She bringeth her food from afar. I love the depiction that's being given here of this virtuous woman who's described as a mother in verse 28. She's always preparing. There is one thing that I believe that wives and mothers all share in common. People like to eat. And I love that it's found here in this particular passage. She's like a merchant ship. She has to go in far distances in the things she does and the things she prepares to bring her food from afar. This means that she's equipped and prudent in calculating her family needs. She's always preparing. You can think back to your mother and think of all the things that she had to prepare. Your clothing. She had to prepare you in the morning. She had to prepare your food for the day. She had to also, in the greater concept of things, prepare you for life. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be as prepared for life as I am if it were not for my mother. And many of you are the same way. They're always preparing, and I love how it gives it. In this concept, we're trying to depict a mother as a rose, as how mothers are always blooming. Blooming roses are always preparing. Because they're always working toward that final goal to be fully bloomed out, so they're always preparing out. And we read in verse 15 through 16, blooming means working. I don't know a mother upon this earth that's not working. Now, I know in the day in which we live, there are some people that don't work. And so understand, I'm not contrasting all mothers of the world. But what we're trying to do this morning is Christian mothers. Mothers with virtue, mothers with value. That's the concept of Proverbs 31. A virtuous woman, her price is far above rubies. In verses 15 through 16, we read this. She riseth up while it's yet night. Before the sun ever rises, she's up. And she giveth meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. She considereth the field and buyeth it with the fruit of her hands, and she plants a vineyard. She's always working. There's one thing that I can see about mothers that's true, and it's something that I see in my wife. They're always working. You know, men, we could take a concept from that. Mothers are always working. She does not lie around when her family needs nourishing. She does whatever she can to help her family. And I love what we find here in verse 16. She considereth the field, and she buyeth it. She sees something that's good for her family, and she works with it. And she sees that in the midst of this good thing of this field here, you look in verse 16, she plants a vineyard. She found a way that she could help with her family. And you know, that's what mothers do all the time, isn't it? Whether it's they're finding ways to help with their children, or whether they find ways to help their first child, their husband, they're always working to find new ways to help. You know, when we think about mothers, there's many ways we could describe them, but I think they're best described here. They're always blooming. But we also have to think about mothers in the next passages, verses 17 through 20. They're always caring or forever caring. I don't know about you, but I know about my mother and I know about Kelly's mother, and they care. And they continue to care. And what's interesting about mothers is after children are gone from the home, what do? They still care. And they keep going. In this particular section, we find she's not afraid. That's verse 17. She girdeth her loins with strength, and she strengthens her arms. She has work to do. She has care to give, and that takes strength. You know, men are usually characterized as people who have strength because we can see the heavy object that needs to be moved, and we try to go pick it up, and usually we do to our detriment. But we think about mothers as mothers of strength because they're strong in what they do. I don't know about you men, but if you've ever been left with your child, how did you feel? Well, you probably felt a little bit strained, a little bit stressed, and probably left feeling like you don't know what you need to be doing. You ever had to change that diaper when nobody was around? You ever had to figure out how to feed them when nobody was around? It's just you and that child. And oh, there you are. But think about the work in which a mother does. It's not just the work she does for the children, the work she does for her husband. It's the work she does around the clock. It's the little things that she does, the things she's always putting above others. She takes care of herself, and she takes care of others. Verses 18 and 19 tells us that she is great. There's something we need to know about mothers. They're great. And something that's interesting to me is God expects mothers to be great. And that's what we find here in verses 18 and 19. She perceiveth her merchandise is good, and her candle goeth out not by night. She layeth her hand to the spindle, and her hands hold to the staff. The concept here is she's working again. But here's the concept. She's great. She's good at what she does. That's how she was created. That's how she was made. She's great. You know, mothers care, and mothers are quality. And that's why they're great here. They see the need in which they have to be going after, and they do so. You can probably think back to your own mother again and imagine all of the times she cared for you. And you can probably imagine right now as you're thinking about that, I know I can, of times you never even realized that she was caring, but she was. She's great in all that she does. She labors day and night, and she puts out the same quality, even though many have to sleep through the night to be able to do this thing. So she is great. But in the same point, she's concerned. And I love verse 20 here. She stretcheth out her hands to the poor, yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. There's something that characterizes mothers and all wives and all women in general. It's the fact that they're concerned. You know, there's a difference between the concern of a man and the concern of a woman. I believe there's a great difference. Because there's this sense of care, there's this sense of nurture, there's this sense of need. Even in all the efforts being described here of this virtuous woman who we're describing as a great mother, she sees somebody else in need. And what does she do? She takes her mother-like characteristics and she applies them to everybody else. You know, there are people in this room right now who are not mothers in the sense that they have their own children. But in the same sense, they are. Because they take those characteristics in which are needed and they apply them to everybody else. I can think of some people right now that I know that are not mothers physically, but yet they care just as much as any mother ever could. And that's the concept being found here of the virtuous woman. She's caring beyond care could be imagined because she's concerned. I love how she's described. She stretches her hand, she reaches forth. And I want us to see this for just a moment. What we've noticed so far is she works with her hands. And she uses her hands with her concern and her care and her greatness, and because she's not afraid to help others. And that's an impressive thing about mothers. So we see she's forever caring. That brings us to this one. And it goes right along with forever caring. She's always giving. Can you imagine a time in which your mother did not give? Can you imagine a time as you as a mother cannot give? You see, I'm in an interesting position. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not. I'm not a mother. So in many aspects, I feel unqualified, distracted, and even unnecessarily unworthy to be able to talk about mothers. Because I don't see this in the same way you do. I see it looking from the other side. You're seeing it looking from your side. But we see something about mothers. They're always giving. And that's something that I see, and I hope you see as well. This is from verses 21 through 25 of the book of Proverbs. You know, when you think about roses, there's something that I love to see, a nice rose bush. Because year in and year out, it yields the same. It yields its quality. It yields its beauty. But it gives unto everyone who sees it in the smells and aroma it puts out. In the wonderful blessings it gives when you give someone some roses or when you give her flowers, it gives great things to make others happy. Mothers are not afraid of the conditions or concerned about their household. Notice verse 21. She's not afraid of the snow for her household. For all her household are clothed with scarlet. That's a concept given there. She has given her household the best. She's given them what they needed. But not only that, she went above and beyond what they needed, and she gave them something that was worthy of a king. Scarlet's an idea or a concept here of royalty. She gave her family that which royalty deserved. Have you noticed something so far? She's always giving. Have you noticed yet that it's not said she bought a field for herself, or she made some clothing for herself, or she sat down at the spindle to spin her something herself? She's always giving. And then in this particular context, in the wintertime, who is clothed as they need to be? Well, the context gives us the concept that she gave up everything she needed for her family. She's always giving. In verse 22, we find that she's diligent. She's diligent in all that she does. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry, and her clothing is a silk of purple. Yes, she gives things to herself because she needs them as well. But I want you to notice this in the book of Proverbs. She gives herself coverings of tapestry, and her cloth is silk and purple. Her family gets the scarlet, the royal garments. And she gets something that's just a grade below. Why? Because she's always giving. She's interested in her own appearance. She's interested in what she's doing. She's interested in her household. She's interested in her home. Many of you ever wondered why your wife loves drapes, or painting colors, or new carpets, or doing this, or adding some trim here, or needing to do this there? Well, I want to tell you something that I find interesting from Proverbs 31, verse 22. This is nothing new. We look at verse 23. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. She made herself drapes. She made something to dress up her home. And have you ever noticed when you ask a mother what she wants for Mother's Day? And I'll go ahead and tell on Kelly for a minute. I asked her about a week ago what she wanted. I thought, I'll just be smart. I'll ask. Something for the house. Something for the house? What is that? I still don't know what that is. But we find something interesting here of Proverbs 31. Mothers are always concerned about the things, and wives are always concerned about the things in which they are around. It may not be the things in which they can tangibly own, that they can tangibly wear about, but it's things that make her life more beautiful. And that's a concept that we men do not understand. She's giving to all in which come into her home. I've never understood why we need new drapes. But I understand here she's giving to all that come into her home, because she wants everyone who comes into her home to be the best, to have the best, because she's always giving, not just to her family. But in that same thought, she's forever sharing in verses 26 through 31. And this is where we see some wonderful things that happen here. Verse 26 says, she shares her wisdom. I don't know about you, but I'll tell this on my mother. I remember the day. I remember where I was standing. I remember what I was wearing when she looked at me and said, when are you going to become a Christian? I'll never forget that. Because she had been sharing with me her wisdom for many years. So I would know what I needed to do. So I would know what I needed to be like. So I would know who I needed to be. And she shares her wisdom. Look at verse 26 here. She opened her mouth with wisdom, and her tongue is the law of kindness. You ever been told not to do something? Did you do it? Did your mother ever tell you, don't touch that? Did you ever touch it? You ever get told the iron was hot? Did you ever have the need to figure out if it was? Did you ever told not to put your finger in the socket and ever find the need to figure out why? Well, her wisdom. But I see the concept of what's happening here in chapter 31 of the book of Proverbs. She opens up her wisdom so we know how to be better. I love this concept of mothers, and it's something that's not only found in the book of Proverbs, but it's a concept that's found in the New Testament as well about mothers and wives. But they're always striving, they're always working, now get this, to share wisdom to make somebody else better. And that's the concept of a mother. She's interested in the morality of her family. She shares what to do and what not to do. Wisdom here means good sense. She shares the good sense. It reminds us of what was happening in Titus chapter 2, verses 2 through 5 in the New Testament. So she's always sharing her wisdom. But verse 27 says she's sharing her security. Look at this. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. You know, when we think about security, I think of deadbolt locks, alarms, thick, unbreakable windows. I think about security. But you know, the mother's concerned about another type of security. It's the security of the soul. Read the verse again, verse 27. She looketh through all the ways of her household. She checks up on you. So when she calls you to see what you're doing, she's checking up on you. Have you ever noticed that you may be grown and you may have children of your own, but your mother still calls to see what you're doing? Because she's concerned about all the goings of her household. You know, when you leave the home, we have this concept that we leave the home of our mother and father and we're gone forever. But that's not the concept. We leave the home, but we're still a part of that family. We're still a part of that home. We may not be dwelling in the midst of that house. We may not be dwelling at that location, but we're always a part of that home. And it interests me that mothers are always concerned about what people are doing. And then we read this phrase, and she eats not the bread of idleness. Idleness is one of the greatest dangers in which exist. And we see that she's wanting to give the characteristics of well, good, and wonderful values. She's always sharing because she's worried about security, the spiritual security. And that brings us to our last thought. She shares with her hands. Now, this particular thought is one that's run through the entire course of the chapter, talking about this virtuous, godly mother. But verse 31 really shatters it down. We find this: give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Sometimes I've been asked, and I've been asked this at least by 3 different younger people who have children, what do I do? And I thought that was the strangest question I'd ever been asked. And what they were really asking were, what do I do during worship? How do I handle that? And I didn't understand that till one day, and I regrettably have to say, one day during a funeral at the graveside, I realized the answer to that question because I read over Proverbs chapter 30, verse 31. What are we to do? And it's the same question the 3 mothers have asked, and it's the same question that Kelly and I have discussed. What is she to do? Well, if you hear the noises that I hear right now, and you see the children that I see right now, and you see the smiles and you see the eyes, I promise you from my point of view right now, it's a different perspective. But you ask, what do I do? It's right before you. What do mothers do? It's right before them. And that's the part she shares with her hands. And what a wonderful thing it is. Her work precedes her as a mother, as a virtuous woman, and she does not have to see after praise, but it's given to her. And that's why verse 28 was a concept in which I wanted read this morning. Her children arise up and call her blessed, and her husband also, and he praiseth her. There's something we need to understand this morning. Mothers, you're special. You're greater than anything we could ever imagine. You're greater than anything that exists. You're special. And here's why you're special. Because you're willing, above anything that happens, above everything that exists, and because of everything you know that's good, wholesome, and right, to give of yourself every day of your life. And you do so selfishly, you do so without reciprocation, and you do so because you're a follower of Christ. You know, one of the greatest things I could think of this morning that a mother would want is for you to make your life right with the Lord. You may not be a mother this morning, and that's okay. You may be a mother this morning, and that's wonderful. You may be a father, you may be a son, you may be a daughter, and that's okay. The greatest thing we could ever consider this morning in the midst of worship is this moment. I know mothers are important. And I know you know mothers are important. And you know God knows mothers are important. Otherwise, He wouldn't have created them. But the greatest thing we can consider this morning is this one question, and it affects all categories in the room. Are you going to heaven? Are you on the heavenly way? Will you spend eternity with the Lord? That's the same question, just different phrasing. It may be the case that you're a mother. Are you? You could be a father. Are you? You could be a child. Are you? And that fits 2 categories. You may not be a child of God this morning, and I want you to know you can be one this morning. Because of all the wisdom that's been instilled in you, because of what's found in the New Testament, you can understand that this book, the book that we call the Bible, the book that we call the Word of God, teaches you and teaches me how to become a child of God by hearing His Word. by believing it, by repenting of your past sins, by changing your life, by confessing the name of Jesus and then being immersed in water for the remission of your sins and to be added to the Lord's church. You can do that this morning. It doesn't matter if you're a father, if you're a mother, or if you're a child. You can become a child of God this morning. Maybe the case that you are a child of God, and you could be a mother that's a child of God, you can be a father that's a child of God, and you can be a child who is a child of God. Is there something in between you and the Lord? Have you done something that you shouldn't have? Have you said something that you should have never said? Have you forgotten to do something that you should have done? Have you transgressed this book that's called the Word of God? Have you done something that separates you eternally from God? Here's the best thing about this day. Yes, it's a day to honor mothers. But it's a day and it's a period right now, as we prepare to sing an invitation song, it's a day in which we can make our lives right with the Lord. You can do that if you need to, as together we stand and sing.
Sing the wondrous love of Jesus.